On May 1st, 2010, the citizens of Nashville, Tennessee braced themselves for historic flooding.
It was essentially the storm of the century.
Joe and Colleen Courys checked their pantry and realized they had very little food and weren't prepared for the storm. They thought they could outrun the storm, so they rushed to a nearby grocery store with their son Clay.
Went shopping, took about a half an hour, and on the way back, we encountered about 10 to 15 inches of water.
The water surrounding their car surged from 10 inches to almost 3 feet in a matter of seconds.
The roads, still hadn't been closed. As we were crossing in our Chevy Trailblazer, it was an immediate surge of water.
At that point, I rolled the window down and I told my wife and my son to get out and get on the hood. I pulled them out and I got on the hood myself.
I knew I had time to use my cell phone one time and to make one call. And I am my mother's only child, and I knew I had to tell her one last time that I loved her if we didn't make it. So my mother said when she got the call from me that, she immediately called people in our church. They started a prayer chain, our minister, and she said, all I thought of was the power of prayer.
A second surge of water slammed the vehicle.
That second surge threw me against the vehicle. So I looked at my wife and my son and I said, I love you, stay with the vehicle.
And I watched that water literally suck him underwater, and he disappeared right before my very eyes. And as Clay, my 12-year-old son, and I were sitting on top of that Chevy Trailblazer, I remember in my mind thinking, oh my goodness, I've just become a widow at the age of 41. I didn't think there was any way Joe could survive that. My son was praying. He said the Lord's Prayer over and over again, and the strength in his voice was unbelievable.
I said a prayer on the top of the car, on the hood of the car. And I kept on praying the whole time because I knew if I prayed, then we'd have a better chance of getting out.
At that point, it was maybe a minute later that I heard my husband screaming our names. I turned to the right and I saw just Joe's head just above in this brown, awful, swirling water.
Joe had grabbed a tree and could see that the water would soon overtake the Trailblazer.
The current just kept getting stronger and kept rising.
Looking at Joe's face and seeing the fear in his face, but he kept looking at me and he kept saying, you're going to be okay. He said, I know that Clay and you aren't going to be able to hold on much longer. It was just like a suction pulled that vehicle and it disappeared. And again, that was a matter of maybe 2 seconds and it was gone.
Colleen and Clay jumped off of the car.
He had one chance to get me, to rescue me. He pulled me out of that water with one arm and literally threw me on this branch above his head. And at that split second, I turned my head to check and see where my son was, and my son had disappeared. Clay was gone, and all I could think of was he was under that water.
That's the point I thought, I'm gonna die.
And then I looked out and I saw him, his face was under the water, just under the surface of the water, and his hand was up. And I reached out and I grabbed him and threw him above me.
After fighting the water for over an hour, the Courys family finally saw 3 EMS workers braving the water and coming toward them in a rowboat.
The water that day was rougher than any water I've ever seen. I've grown up on the water, and never have I seen water this rough.
I just remember thinking, Lord, please give them the strength and the abilities to get to us in this water. I remember Lieutenant Sam Clark told us, he said, look, we have one chance to make this work. He said, we have seconds. He said, this boat isn't going to last much longer.
Joe, Colleen, and Clay all caught their life jackets and were pulled into the boat with a drag line. After the rescue, 18 men on shore heaved the rowboat back in with a rope.
I relived my son's voice saying the Lord's Prayer over and over again as he was clinging onto those vines and fighting that water.
Prayer is powerful, and whatever you're going through, doesn't matter what it is, God can help you go through it as long as you ask for His help.
God's hand was there. I mean, it was there with us that entire time. It's just an incredible feeling to, experience that kind of love.
Without a shadow of a doubt, God is there. Without a shadow of a doubt, He cares about His children. It was divine intervention at all points in time, and I can tell you, that day in that water, those prayers were answered.